Alrighty, everybody. So we're going to do a quick video on how JSON works. So if you've never heard of JSON, if you've hold on one second, let me turn this down a little bit. Da, 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 da. There we go. If you've never heard of JSON, it's kind of like a better version of player prefs. Actually, player prefs is, I believe, just JSON but formatted differently to make it a little bit more user friendly to new Unity developers. The disadvantage to player prefs is if I asked you where would you go to look at your player prefs, you might not know where that is. I personally don't. And that's one of the reasons that it's generally not the best way to go about saving your data. Whenever you have like an auto magic solution, is what me and my coworkers used to call it. It generally isn't, except for in like really small circumstances, the best solution. Um, as a little project that I have built, and the end result that we should be able to have is a scene that we can go ahead and input some numbers, input some words. JSON is great. Save it. See that it's been applied to our JSON script. Open a save data file. You can see there's word number or number 5 and word. Oh, that's actually not right. Hold on, let's go here. Sometimes this folder down here doesn't actually refresh until you actually open the file. So there's word number 5 and JSON is great, just like we typed in over here. All right. So you should be able to look at where your save data is, and that's one of the big benefits of JSON is it makes a file that you can actually go and take a look at rather than just assume that things are saved in the background. Um, And then by the end of this, you should be able to save that and then load it back. All right. So how does this all start? Okay. I have a couple scripts here. So you'll want to bring this over. Let's just delete this. We don't need it. You will need a game manager and a JSON serializer script. Okay. Don't worry about the stuff that's in here. We're going to go through it together. We're going to start with the game manager. Now, this is partially used from another lecture I have, so don't worry about it too much. If you are unfamiliar with statics and singletons, that's something that I suggest doing some research on. But go ahead and this has nothing to do with the JSON. It's just going to make our life a little easier. I'm going to delete that lives variable there. This is going to make our life a little bit easier when we want to get things loading and whatnot. So go ahead and copy this down. Essentially what we're doing is we're making a game manager and a static instance of it. That means you can access it throughout the entire script or in the entire code base without having a reference to it. Again, if that doesn't make total sense, feel free to come by and ask, or I can make another video to go over statics and singletons. This don't destroy unload, also not super important because this example is only one scene. Actually, I'm just going to get rid of that. Um, and then hold off on this guy. We're going to come back to it in just a bit when we do our load. Okay, so really right now you just want to do make this a little bit easier to see, this content and make sure you're using TM Pro. We're using TMP input fields, and that is only going to work if you have using TM Pro up at the top. Now, back over to Unity, we're going to want, it's got to recompile my scripts real quick. You're going to want to make a game manager, game object, and put the game manager script on it. If you haven't already built your UI a little bit, go ahead and build that. I just did a background, 2 buttons, one for save and load, and 2 input fields. Now, going into the input fields, you will want to make one of them only take integer numbers. Okay, it's very, very important, or else you're going to start having some errors. So here's my input field. I made it. I went over here and I switched it from standard to integer number. Okay, the other one you don't have to do anything to. Standard is fine. Okay. So this is all just setting up our scene. We haven't actually done any JSON yet. But you'll also, I just realized while looking at this, probably be getting an error for this unless you made your Json Serializer class already. So remember I had said make game manager and Json Serializer. Okay. All right, so going over to Json Serializer, we're going to ignore some of this for right now. Now, the way that save data generally works in games is you'll either have, if it's a small game, one big save data file. If you've ever played a Fallout game or something like that, you've probably opened up big old text files. Bethesda games are just like the default because people mod them so much. Big old text files where you have values with um, like how much damage something does, how much money you have in your save, or how much health you have in your save, or where you are in your save. JSON can be used for all kinds of things, whether it's sending out reports on user activity, doing save load data, even if you have, like, let's take, for example, all the stores in Fallout, right? Every NPC you can buy from, you can go and have a JSON file for here's an item, this is how much it's worth. It doesn't necessarily have to be user save data, it can just be data tied to a value. Okay. Um, for example, a project I'm working on, we use JSON in order to represent the every tile in our level editor. So as you're editing levels, when you save it, it saves it all as a JSON file, and then we have another script that it can interpret the JSON file and rebuild the level from it. So we don't actually have to go physically and build all the levels. But for this example, we're simply just going to be doing save data. And you'll see that I have this. This might be the first time you've seen something like this where normally when we have a script, we have a public class name of your script and then inheriting from mono behavior. If you do coding a bit, then you would definitely have probably seen this before. But classes don't have to inherit from anything. Those are generally called, or at least how I call it, they're just data classes. Um, they're just hold. If you think of your vector threes, a vector three is a good example of this. Vector three has, this might not be exactly how they set it up, but you know a vector three has an x, y, and z, right? And those are floats. Um, because I can go here. Let's just make a real quick function. Public void checking out vector. You don't have to write this. This is just to get my point across. We know that if I make a vector, new vector 3, let me actually write this correctly. We know that it has you can see right here, an XYZ. You could think of a game save data, its XYZ will be a number and a word. Same deal, right? It's just a example of you are making a new thing, okay? And our new thing is just going to have a public int and a public string word. And these are going to be what we're editing and what we're saving and loading from those input fields. So at the bottom, outside of your JSON serializer, there are two separate classes. You could make this its own file in Unity, but I tend to like stick the save data in with the thing that's going to be serializing and deserializing, which we'll talk about in just a minute. You do want to have this system.serializable up at the top. This will let you see it throughout in Unity and in the inspector and stuff like that. Okay. And then the last thing you'll need to do when it comes to game save data is make an instance of it. Your JSON serializer should have an instance of uh, your game save data. And once you do that, you don't have to worry about save and load just yet. You should be able to come over here, make an object. I put it on my canvas that has that JSON serializer script on it. And you should see that you have your GSD with a number and word. Okay. Now, if I hit play, you'll see that it doesn't auto-load anything. There's nothing to save. With what we have right now, you can't do anything. You just have an empty class. Imagine you started up a game and you haven't done anything yet. This is where we need to actually get into the JSON. All right. One thing, let me delete some of these usings up here. You'll need to do for us going forward is you'll need to import these two libraries. And when I say import, I just mean do the usings, right? So using newtonsoft.json, using system.io. Now, there are, if you do some research on JSON, some solutions that Unity gives us. It gives us something called the JSON utility, and it's not super great, okay? Newtonsoft is, I believe, owned by Microsoft. It's just like a subsect, uh, and or at least it was bought out or something. And they kind of made a very, very good JSON package that is now just shipped with Unity and Visual Studio. So doing this gives us more JSON tools that are much, much more efficient and just work better. You know, they're simpler to use. Um, and system.io allows you to write files to your disk and whatnot. So if I expand our save, I'm going to put game manager side by side with it. What we're doing here is we have our GSD. Generally, as you make things bigger, let's do this actually. We're going to go public void get data. The way you generally structure things is when you do save, you want to go and check all the relevant data points that you need to access. And those data points could be changed. You can kind of do it two ways. It depends on the scope of your game. Let me do this real quick before I forget. You can have those data points updating your save file constantly. So like player health, right? You don't necessarily need to have this Json serializer go and get the health. You could have the health constantly updating. In this case, pretend number was tracking our health. You could have the health constantly updating GSD's number, right? There's not, it just really depends on how you want to architect your code. Or when you hit save, you could have it reach its fingers out all over the code base and pull the data. Because there's not a lot of data to pull, this is a good instance of doing that. But neither are right or wrong. It just depends on the scope and how you have your game architected. So right now we're saying, hey, the word from GSD equals the text of the text input field that Game Manager has a hold of. This is why we made Game Manager static, right? So that way then we can just go Game Manager instance and get any variables off of it. And the same deal with the number. Because it's a text field, when you type into those text boxes, we have to do this int.parse. So basically it's going to look at the text in the text box and try and get an integer out of it. All right. And that's all that this get data is doing. Now, this is where things get a little funky. The way JSON is formatted is JSON simply is a long string of text. When you look at JSON, it can get really goofy and look really, really weird. And I'm actually going to open up a project on the side real quick. I should have had this open. I'll get this opening real quick so I can show you guys a long JSON. What JSON serialize object does, just JSON convert serialize object, is you give it a system.serializable object, then it converts it into that long string of text, okay? And then we take that long string. You can see if I hover over this, it says string.converted JSON, or not dot, but just string JSON, because this var, if you don't know how var works, it basically turns into whatever variable type this side of the equal sign puts out, which serialized object, if we hover over, returns a string. So then the var becomes a string. I'm going to go ahead and close Game Manager so we don't need it there. Now, this next line is where the system.io comes from. We say file, write all text, because we know a string is just a bunch of text. And then you have to say, where does it write to? Now you have options here. I specifically am doing application data path plus, and this is the folder name, and this is the name of the file that it's going to make, .json. Generally, in a built game, you would want to do persistent data path. You would not want to do data path. What data path gives you, give me just a second, is your assets folder. And on a built game, you don't have an assets folder to build to, so this would error out, okay? The reason I'm doing this is for the sake of this example. Application.persistent data path, there are some platforms, I think it does not work on iOS, but there are uh, 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 most platforms, I know Android and Windows, it works fine. You would save it to that persistent data path. Plus, you can make the folder. What this would do is if there isn't a saved data, it would make a folder for saved data, and then it would make a data.json file. Okay. And actually, that might not be true. That it might not make the saved data folder. So you may want to actually go and put that there just to begin with. I'm blanking on it right now, but I'm pretty sure it does make it. But in this case, it's just going to go to my this wrong project, my saved data folder right here, and you can see that's my data file. Now, the second parameter that write alt text takes is your actual contents. What are you writing? And that is just a string. So we're going to write our converted JSON to the data file, right? And that gets you your JSON saved to the disk. So that's like half the step, right? If we go now, that's GitHub. Here we go. And go to our, let me rename this, save button and load button. If we go to our save button now, you should drag whatever object you put your JSON serializer on. And again, I put my canvas, put it on my canvas, and go to the drop down JSON serializer and save, right? Just so that way then your button can actually do the save function. And from there, as long as you've assigned everything, you should be able to save your data. Again, make sure Game Manager has all the relevant things. Make sure Save button has the function. But now you should be able to put, I don't know, let's put 3, and I'm just going to put some words in here. Hi, YouTube. We're going to go ahead now, and we're going to hit Save. And if we open up our data file, you might not see a data file pop up here. Okay, if you don't have anything in here, it takes a minute to refresh, and sometimes you actually have to open up the Explorer, your file Explorer, in order for it to refresh. Let's see if that did it. There we go. Number 3 word, hi YouTube. Okay, so that's how you do the saving. And when I said Open Explorer, you have to go to where the file is, I believe, in order for it to actually refresh. So let's get the load working. This is actually a bit more complicated, or at least it can be. So first and foremost, you need to check to see that the file exists. Like, is there a file at the place that I'm saving things? Because if not, this will all error out. Okay. Now we say, hey, we want to read all the text from where we saved. And that again is going to turn into a string. And then we want to deserialize the object into our GSD variable. Okay, remember our GSD is the game save data. Okay, and because we went ahead and saved just this guy, this GSD, let's go back. We serialized a GSD. When we load a GSD, it should, if you give it the format. So when you do deserialize object, you have to give it what it should deserialize into. It should put all the data where it belongs. Okay, and that's all well and good. If we go and do that, I'm going to comment this line out real quick. Let's go back over to Unity. We'll see on my JSON serializer, this is empty, but when I press load, it updates. There's my 3 and there's hi YouTube. Now, the tricky part and why load is a little bit more complicated is because you have to do something with that, right? In this case, you have to go and I wrote this little update value function on my game manager. Let's go to that real quick, which just simply puts all the text back into the text fields. Now, you might have something different, right? You might have health that has to go to the player controller, and then it also has to update the health bar and stuff like that. Or you might have a player controller that needs its position, so that way then you load the position that the player was saved at and moves it there. These kinds of things get very, very complicated as games get bigger and bigger. But now, if we go ahead and we hit play, and we hit load, we'll see that my text fields update. And that's really the power of JSON. The cool thing about it is you're no longer using player prefs that just saves things into some file in the sky, right? You can look here and you'll see like you made these variables because you named them that in the class in your game save data class, and you'll be able to always look to see what value is saved. And that's about it. There is a little bit more complex stuff that we could look at, but I think that's all we're going to do for this video. You may run into issues as you update your game save data file that, I said that was it for this video. I did want to show you guys one more thing. As you add variables to your game save data, I believe there's, if you remove variables, your save data will no longer match. We've all modded things and had to some stuff just not work correctly, or if you save a game that's modded and try and open it up, sometimes things get a little stuffed. That this is one of the many reasons that that kind of stuff happens, because as you change the structure of your save data, you need to make sure that the JSON will accommodate it. Adding variables is usually fine because it just has nothing in for those variables. But removing variables, if I were to remove number, might be a little rough because it's going to have a variable that it no longer it has a value there and it doesn't have anywhere to put it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It just kind of is a coin toss on if it's going to mess up your loading or your saving in the long run. Now, that's for save data. That's, the user presses save. You can also use it in JSON in different ways, like saving your, let's see if it's in here, saving like assets and tools that you make. I think it's in my resources folder for data sets. So, for example, JSON can get incredibly long, right? Here's a couple of JSON files that we use for building our levels in game I'm working on. And you can see it says etc. This isn't even, it goes, and if you open up a JSON file that's long, you can press Control KD and it'll format it. But you can see that this is very, very long, but it's also readable. Each of these little sections here is if you think of like a tile map, there's a tile saying what position it's at, what type of tile, what rotation, and what if it has a utility type. And these are all variables that we've made in our project. This kind of stuff is generally how our levels get built in games. It's not, once you get to a point, you can no longer, of like complexity in your games, you can no longer just go into levels and build them all by hand, depending on the game type. Open world games, stuff like that might be fine, but if you're constantly loading in new levels and whatnot, you might have them broken down into serialized things like this so that they can be rebuilt at runtime. It's an option, but you can use the same kind of methodology for like weapon stats or how much things cost in a store in a game or stuff like that. These can all be built off of JSON files that just supply data. And the cool thing is you can, depending on, this might not be a good example for it, but say that you were doing your weapon stats. You can go to that JSON file and just change values rather than having to go into Unity. So let's imagine that this was like this X, instead of being an X position, was damage that laser rifle did. I could go in here and instead of doing 1 damage, I can change it to 2 and save it. And I'm going to change that because that's going to mess up my game. But You can go in instead of having to go into Unity and make a whole new build and stuff like that. You could, if these values are like hosted on a server or something like that, go and change the text rather than going through and making a new big app update. It's a lot of the time why our games nowadays require connections online all the time, because instead of developers having to do big old app updates and whatnot, they can just go to a server, change some values, and you'll see those values reflected in the game when somebody boots up the game. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today. I hope this was helpful. If you have questions, feel free to stop by my office or drop a comment in the comment section. Thanks.